Hi, welcome to our first episode of Mental Health with Chronic Illness, and my first guest is Lindsay.
Hi guys, my name is Lindsay, and on Instagram I go by Don't Fork This Up. And I started that page a year or so ago when I was having a lot of health issues, stomach issues, chronic pain, joint pain, fatigue, and everywhere I read online was basically telling you to not eat gluten, not eat dairy, change your diet if you want to be fixed. And so I started just eating healthier, and that was my first step to kind of trying to figure out this whole illness thing on my own and based on doctor's recommendations too. So I have that page. And I really started getting a lot of symptoms of something, but we didn't know what it was. Probably when I was 19, 20, I started getting joint pain in my hip, and that kind of spread to different parts of my body. I also had horrible stomach pains, went to 3 or 4 different stomach doctors specifically, and just continued the journey for years now to figure out what exactly has been going on. I do have a Lyme diagnosis, but we also have suspicions of other things going on. And it's just really taken a toll on my life. But thankfully to Abby and our little support group that she set up, it's been made a lot easier by having a system to connect with. And I've learned a lot through them and been able to make this life a little bit better living with a chronic illness.
Thank you. First of all, I am obsessed with Lindsay's account. So if you don't follow it, then you should, because I'm obsessed with it. It has great food if you're allergic to gluten and dairy. So Lindsay gave you a quick little background of her story. So Lindsay, now if you want to start talking about how it affected you mentally, if you had any mental health issues before, and then kind of maybe how it progressed as you got sick, since you got sick a little later in life, like 19. So what was that like?
Yeah, so I've always kind of had anxiety growing up. We're not sure if this was a result of possibly getting bit by a tick when I was younger or just having anxiety. And so I'd always kind of struggled with that mental health aspect of it, but I didn't really understand true kind of like depression and loneliness until I started having symptoms of a chronic illness, because kind of it came really out of nowhere. I felt like I went from being a super active college kid, hiking all the time, running, working out, weightlifting, to pretty much bedridden some days. Didn't want to get out of bed, was in so much pain, crying on the floor, could barely go on walks with my friends, could barely work out anymore. And I think that was the first thing that was the hardest, because being active was part of my identity. I played sports growing up. And when an illness like this basically makes you bedridden at times, it does take away part of your identity, and you have to kind of rediscover who you are in a way. And that was the first really isolating feeling like my body was fighting against me and I couldn't even do the things I enjoyed anymore. And so with that, that's how I really got into cooking and other hobbies, because I couldn't do what I'd been doing for all these years. So that was the first kind of really hard thing mentally. And then coming with that, with not being able to figure out what was wrong with me for a couple of years, was really isolating and lonely, because I was 20 years old and all my friends were really active, can do whatever they want. And I didn't know anybody else that was dealing with anything like this. And so I just think the hardest part was the loneliness of it and the uncertainty, which caused a lot of depression at times. And thankfully, because of dealing with anxiety growing up, I had the coping mechanisms I needed to help kind of get myself out of those tough spaces. And there definitely are certain days where the kind of depression and mood comes back down. Really depends on my symptoms that day. I noticed that my symptoms and my mood are pretty much go hand in hand. If I'm having a flare up, I'm probably going to be really mad. But I think what helps me through it is knowing that, especially for me, my flare ups like don't last for too long. So I might have a bad couple days, but then I know that in a few days I'll get to feeling a little bit better, which helps me specifically. I don't know if that helps a lot of other people too, but that's really where it affects my mood a lot. Just some days are good and some days are bad, which is really frustrating, because it's why it's hard for people to get diagnosed, because some people just have symptoms that come and go. And it's really hard mentally not knowing what kind of day you're going to have and making plans and not knowing if you're going to feel good on Saturday or if you're going to wake up and have a really bad flare up on Saturday. It's just hard, but it's made me have to go with the flow in a lot of aspects of my life.
So I think that's where we relate a lot, for sure, is like losing the athletic part of our lives. I found that one of the hardest things to do and deal with. I also wanted to ask, so you said you had anxiety before, so you were able to bring coping mechanisms over kind of when you started dealing with the isolation and depression from Lyme. Was that easy, or was that kind of harder to do, because it's kind of two different things almost? They're coming from two different things too, and they're obviously a little different.
Yeah, I think Something I learned a lot with the anxiety, I ended up getting hospitalized at one point just because it was just so horrible mentally. I couldn't stand to be I need to cut this. Sorry. It was just a really hard time and I needed a break. So I just went to hospital for a little while just to kind of learn some different coping mechanisms. And I think the biggest thing I learned there is that with my anxiety, I have a lot of triggers, and I was able to bring those triggers into my health. So I was able to notice certain foods triggered me, like my symptoms and certain activities. And so being able to kind of learn, I think that being able to learn how to deal with my anxiety was able to help me kind of learn how to deal with my body flare-ups at times too, like being more aware of what's going on. But it definitely, going back to just like anxiety and depression and stuff in general, it wasn't necessarily any easier going through it physically, because when I was mentally not okay, I was just mentally not okay. My body was perfectly fine. But when you're dealing with a physical ailment as well as a mental ailment, it's like a stacked on top of each other. So it was definitely horrible at times. It's definitely gotten better over the years because of the coping mechanisms that I've been able to bring in, especially like finding support was probably the biggest thing for me. Cause like we said, feeling isolated is probably one of the hardest parts, feeling like nobody understands, nobody's gonna believe you or understand you. And I think that being able to find a support system is what mentally helped me the most, like finding a coping mechanism like that.
I agree. I think just having no one else in your life that understands it all is probably one of the hardest things ever. So how long did you feel like you were stuck in that, like the isolation? I mean, you could still be, but I would think it was worse at the beginning. Do you agree? I don't know, maybe not.
Definitely a lot worse at the beginning. I feel like the isolation part probably lasted for about a year and a half or so once my symptoms started, because it just came out of nowhere. We didn't know if I had an injury or really what was going on. So I wasn't so quick to get a Lyme diagnosis or any sort of other diagnosis. So it was really hard finding community or finding somebody that could understand, because it's really hard to get a diagnosis, but once you have a diagnosis, it's kind of relieving in a way because you know other people, it's easier to kind of identify yourself again as like, I don't say that I identify as someone like I have Lyme disease, that's like the whole part of me, but it's easier to find people who understand once you do get a diagnosis kind of thing. But that was definitely, until I found people that could relate to what I was going through, it was definitely a lot more isolating.
Yeah, I would agree that in the beginning of mine, kind of as a kid, it was super isolating too. Did you find that people would kind of not believe you or dismiss you, like old friends or anything, or if you lost any friends? Because for me, as I grew up, I started to lose friends because they'd be like, oh, you were okay over the weekend. Why can't you come to school this week? Or I wish I wasn't at school, or just kind of mean comments without the intention of being mean. And some, I guess, were intentional, but for the most part, they aren't. So do you have anything like that?
Yeah, thankfully, none of my friends have been they've tried to be really understanding of what's going on. But I have had people kind of say, oh, it's just in your head, it's anxiety, you're just stressed out. But it wasn't until I got actual lab work done, or what was it? X-rays, that we were able to see, oh, there actually is arthritis in these parts of your body and stuff going on, that people were really believing me more. Because I think what the hardest part is for other people is I don't want to be someone constantly complaining about my symptoms. Like every day I wake up in some sort of pain, but I don't want to go, hey mom and dad, hey everyone in my life, I'm in pain today. And some days I do say that. I'll have a day where I do bring up that I'm in pain, and they're like, oh, you've been so good the past couple of weeks, like where'd this come from? And I'm like, no, I've been hurting the whole time, but I don't want to be an annoyance and bring it up all the time. So I think that was hard with some friends and family sometimes, when I wasn't talking about being in pain all the time. It was harder for them to think that I was, do you know what I'm saying? Where it's like, you don't want to bring it up all the time and be an annoyance, but when you're not bringing it up, they assume you're okay. And I'm like, no, I'm not okay, but I don't want to be negative all the time about it. But definitely getting some lab work and and x-rays and an EMG that said I was physically having issues was definitely a bit of help for other people to understand, because they can't see that I'm in pain. But when your doctor says, oh, you have 6 pinched nerves, and your x-ray, you have arthritis, they're like, oh, like you definitely do have something going on.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part too, because like if we were to wake up every day and tell them what is going on, then it would feel annoying from us. I'm sure maybe some people in our lives wouldn't care, but it's like you don't want to wake up every day and be negative all the time, because that's not great for your mental health either.
Yeah.
because I think that would be terrible to just wake up and remind myself every day that I don't feel good. So with depression then, do you ever feel like you have major highs and major lows, like especially because it fluctuates with your symptoms, and some days you have high symptoms, some days they're okay? So I definitely experience like extreme highs and then extreme lows, but then it's hard to separate what's mental and what's physical at the same time.
Yeah,
or they're together.
I think for me, one of my kind of biggest triggers to make me, I wouldn't say that I'm clinically depressed by any means, but I definitely know what depression feels like. For anyone that does have depression, I'm not trying to like make them not heard.
Yeah.
But when I think that definitely one of my triggers to put me in those depressive episodes is going to new doctors and every person saying, oh, you're so young, why are you dealing with it? Or how are you dealing with this? How have you not found a diagnosis for exactly what's going on? That definitely gets me really, really down. The worst thing I like, because I know people mean well by saying, I feel so bad that you're going through this, but constantly reminding myself that just doesn't help me at all. Like I used to be a lot more depressed about the situation I'm in, but it's made me the situation. I've tried to learn how I can benefit from it and help other people. Even now, after having my food account, I have friends who've been diagnosed with Crohn's disease, POTS, and other illnesses who will reach out to me and ask for recipe tips or ask like, what's your favorite gluten-free thing, dairy-free thing? Because a lot of people will, a lot of doctors will prescribe like a dairy-free, gluten-free lifestyle if you have any sort of illness. So I even had a friend text me the other day saying, I love that you turned this negative thing in your life into something positive, because I started it because I was miserable that I couldn't eat anything any of my friends were eating. And now people are coming to me for advice. And that kind of thing really gets me out of those depressive episodes, remembering that I can help people who are going through the same thing. And this isn't my whole life. My whole life isn't just Lyme disease or whatever I'm going to get diagnosed with one day. I might be in pain, but other people are what like it's so good about finding support is knowing that other people are going through it. Yeah, it sucks, but it makes it feel less alone. But I think definitely what gets me out of the depressive episodes is remembering not the benefits of it, but kind of how I can turn the negative into a positive situation.
I agree with that. I did the same thing with my account. I was like, oh my God, I've met so many people, and it's just really, really nice, in my opinion, to talk to all of them and we can all relate at the same time. So when you said you don't think you're clinically depressed, I think a ton of people also feel that way, that they know they aren't. But when they got sick, it's like they felt extremely depressed, even though clinically they aren't. So I think it's like almost like a side effect of illness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, kind of
like
you
might know you're not, but you still feel depressed as if you are clinically depressed.
It's like I think situational depression, because I have had situational depression before. That's what I'd gone to the hospital before, but I know I can get out of it. I know some people have a really hard time getting out of it, but I think with having an illness, I could be more, it just depends on the day kind of for me. Like there are days where I feel what depression feels like, but I know that I can also have good days too.
Yeah, I think that you can have a lot of good days. I think it's hard for people to remember that and recognize that for sure. If you don't mind talking about this quickly, do you feel like the hospitals helped you at all? Because I know a lot of other people have been to those hospitals. And some people feel like it didn't help, or some people feel like they need to go. Some people just don't like it. So what was your take on it?
I think I definitely would never want to go back now, just because I feel like one time was enough for me to learn what I needed to learn from there. But I personally had not a good experience there kind of exactly, but looking back on it, it was a good experience for me to have, because it did kind of help me put my situation in perspective. I didn't go for health reasons. I went for other personal reasons, but I think it's just important to validate what you're going through. It sucks. It's horrible, but to also realize that other people also have really shitty things they're going through too. And like, it's just part of being a human and being able to meet other people that were at the point in their life where they felt like they needed to check themselves into a hospital to get some help. It was kind of nice to be around other people who were that low. Like misery loves company in a way. Like it was nice to know that other people were going through it, but I think it just was really beneficial putting my situation in perspective. And like, it's no one's meant to have a perfect life, and every day is not going to be easy. And seeing that other people were also going through other bad situations was just really helpful for me to put my life in perspective with that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like I went there too. I hated it, like you said, but I also met some of my best friends there. So I'm grateful I did go. and to be surrounded by people that just feel that low too. It's like almost validating because a lot of people don't talk about it. Especially on Instagram, I think, right? It's a lot of positivity on Instagram, which is great. But then I feel like there's not enough, I don't want to say negativity, but not enough openness about really low days or really bad days. And then a lot of people are like, am I the only one that feels this low with this illness? Because it's hard to see people with the same illness so happy and doing things on Instagram, which is a good thing. I think it's motivational, but I think there needs to be a balance.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because I do follow some accounts who will post days where they're like in bed crying, and I'm like, I get you. Like, I feel this. I usually comment and tell them I hope their day gets better and stuff. I do feel like with social media, no matter what, there is sort of this still kind of like wanting to be like perfect kind of thing on Instagram, because I do follow some health and wellness accounts who they still only post like the good days. I'm trying to think of how to word this. It's like, I don't know how to explain that, but
no, I get what you're saying. It's hard to explain.
It's hard to explain because, like, I mean, I definitely don't post a lot of my bad days. I think for me, one of my fears is just that people will be super worried, or I'll find someone, a job recruiter or someone will see them having a bad day and be like, nope, you are a negative person on social media, like that we don't need you. And that is kind of scary. So that's why I do definitely talk a lot more about stuff like this in different groups of people that I feel comfortable sharing with. But I still really, really appreciate the people who are definitely more vulnerable on the internet with having the bad days, because it makes me and other people feel a lot less alone.
Yeah. So I agree with that. That I also at first was scared to be so vulnerable and open and almost like complaining all the time, even though everyone knows it's not complaining. But I think it also definitely helps other people, like you said, to realize they're not the only ones feeling this low about something they're going through, because it's hard. Like, going through this is not easy.
So hard.
Yeah, and you can get extremely low. And I know a lot of people have, and I've talked to people who are like, I've never felt this low in my entire life. Even like side effects of medicine, I've had a lot of people tell me that the medicine has made them so much worse mentally. So I'm wondering if with medicine too, did you ever feel like it made you worse mentally or lower or anything like that?
Yeah. So I have been on a lot of different just kind of like sort of like supplement kind of things. And then I also was recently put on Cymbalta and Lyrica for joint and muscle pain, which are also antidepressants. And so they can have some psychological side effects. And one of them was giving me horrible anxiety. It was just making it worse. And I did end up going off of it. I just think it's super important to tell your doctor when you're feeling like something isn't right. And I'm just such a believer in listening to your body and just being really aware of yourself. So if you realize, if you're having really bad anxiety and you're like, did I start new medications? Could something be causing this? And then to just tell your doctor has been really helpful for me, just communicating with them a lot. But yeah, that definitely, I've had side effects like that from it. And then I guess just from generally taking 20 pills a day, that's a lot to put on someone. You're like, no one else my age even takes like 1 pill a day, maybe Claritin D. And I'm like throwing down 20 pills in the morning for breakfast. So that was just kind of hard to just actually taking the pills. Again, it's so weird to think that you have to take so many medications for a sickness, but I have had benefits from some of them. But yeah, it is just every morning I'm like taking my pills. My friends are like, I'm so sorry. It's fine. I'm used to it now.
Yeah. Going on medicine, I think I've told people I haven't taken mine in so long because it's so many. You have like 20, you have 30, some people have 40,
yeah,
even 10. Like 10 is still a lot. And I think just breaking that mental barrier to take them is like extremely hard. So have you ever not been able to break it, or do you kind of talk yourself through it in any way?
Yeah, there's some times where I just have a hard time taking them, but most days I just kind of I make it kind of a routine. So I'll bring over my basket of pills, set it at my computer, and it makes it easier having something to do kind of. So I'll like watch a YouTube video and just start taking all of them. And I think what helps me a little bit is the last thing I take are my gummy vitamins for vitamin C, and they taste really good. And so I'm like, okay, if I choke all these pills down, I get to have my gummies, and then that makes it a little bit better. So like maybe get yourself a fun little vitamin C vitamin. I
think that's really good advice that a lot of people will be able to use. So I've talked to a lot of people who are like, I just can't do it. Like I do not have the mental strength to take this medicine because it's so many. I also think with that, if it is too hard, that you should always talk to your doctor too, see if they'll drop you down to like maybe 5, like my doctor did, drop you down to like even 1, just to get something in you. I think is also really, really beneficial. I wanted to go back on anxiety just because I wanted to see kind of the difference between your anxiety before illness and then anxiety after, instead of like anxiety versus depression. Did you feel like there was a change in it, or maybe some of it was coming from different things now or anything?
Yeah, so I think my anxiety beforehand that I've had pretty much my whole life was by feeling really out of control of situations. I don't think I had like control issues, but it was kind of like I'd get anxiety when I knew things were out of my control. And I think honestly, with having Lyme disease and different illnesses, a lot of the anxiety came from uncertainty. And so those were things that were completely out of my control that I couldn't have any control over. And so I think in a way, the anxiety that I had beforehand and now are completely different, because one of them, it's both kind of comes from uncertainty, but one of them was, I'm trying to explain how to like, now I have more anxiety about not knowing exactly what's going on in my body and not knowing if it's going to get worse. But I've been able to better control it by just kind of realizing that I don't know what's going to happen. Like some of these things are really out of my control. And I think I just find a lot of relief in knowing that I'm not going to be happy if I sit down and try to figure out exactly what's wrong with me and exactly what to do every single day. Because I think about 1.5 years ago, I would sit in my room and cry pretty much every day because I had no idea what was going on. This was before a Lyme diagnosis. And I was freaked out. I thought I'd gone to doctors who said I had a connective tissue disease. So in my head, I'm thinking my body is attacking itself and I'm literally rotting away and sitting here. And so that freaked me out a lot. And I think what did help some was just going to doctors who were just like more knowledgeable and being, because a lot of times like I had a lot of anxiety issues with like going on WebMD and looking up my symptoms, and everything said I had cancer or I had something that I was gonna die in a week or something. And I think definitely like what helped with that was not continuing to look up symptoms, because the internet will just bring you down a rabbit hole, and just listening to your doctor sometimes has helped me. But I think my anxiety has definitely gotten a lot more under control just by knowing that it's so, you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. I think just like to sum it up, like with symptoms, especially like I could have a good day. I never know if I'm going to wake up with a good day or a bad day. So that's like a small scale thing of knowing that every day I have to just kind of go with the flow, and like having, I don't know how to explain this, but like, it's just by having this has made me have to be more go with the flow just in general, because every day is different. And so it's made me just I have less anxiety realizing that I have to just go with the flow every day, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. I used to do the same thing growing up. I'd have no idea what's wrong, and I would not even believe the doctors, rightfully so, because they were some of them are just terrible, and like they'll say something and you're like, yeah, that makes no sense. So how did you make that transition from like then to now? So like 1.5 years, you said, right?
Yeah, it's been about 1.5 years since that was horrible, just with anxiety. I think just my big transition was I've done a lot of kind of like reflecting and self-growth stuff, which like is stupid as it kind of sounds, like just realizing, hey, I'm feeling this anxiety because I feel out of control. And then realizing I don't really have control of this. I mean, you do in certain aspects. You can find doctors and do different things to help yourself, but really like finding a diagnosis is just hard. That's part of it. And realizing that worrying about it every single day isn't going to get me an answer any faster, unless I'm going to be doing any sort of, I guess, like unless I have a new doctor's appointment coming up or something, it's just not worth worrying about it. Because something I have learned too is with worrying and stress, your body holds on to that and can exacerbate some people's symptoms. And I think it was more just like a mindset change over the past 1.5 years, and learning that I just can't, it's not going to do, worry serves no useful purpose. That's what my mom always says. So
I think that's really important, because a lot of people just worry and worry and worry and worry.
I still do worry sometimes, but
yeah,
it's gotten a lot better.
That's good. But yeah, like everyone just worries and worries and worries and worries. And it's like, there's nothing you can do about it, but it's hard to not worry when you have some doctors telling you like, that it's nothing. Others could be exaggerating. Like it might not be as bad as what they say they think it is.
Mhm.
So I think that's really hard to go through too, with just not knowing, because
Yeah, I
not knowing
remember-
anything is scary.
Yeah, and I remember, I think it was about a year and a half ago when I went to my first kind of naturopath doctor. So he was doing all of these tests, like Epstein-Barr, and pretty much all these tests. And I think one of the things I've learned about getting blood work done is I try to not look at my lab results until I have my doctor's appointment, because I used to drive myself up the walls looking at my blood work before, like my lab work online before I'd have the appointment, and making all these guesses about myself. And when you're searching for a diagnosis and seeing high, low, like things that aren't normal, you start to think of the worst case scenario. And so that's what would really give me horrible anxiety about a year and a half ago, because I started getting all this different blood work. And so I think just trying your best to not look at it and not draw conclusions has really helped me a lot with anxiety, with figuring out what could be wrong with me, because I'd always assumed the worst. And my doctor was like, Lindsay, I would have called you if you were going to die tomorrow. Like, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly. Like my doctor will even say, like, if it's really bad, I'll call you. He like does that reminder. And I think a lot of people do look at their blood work early and they're like, oh my God, this is low. I'm going to die.
Yeah.
Like this is going to kill me. And this is a sign of whatever, some terminal illness. When usually it isn't. And it's hard to get past that worry though, because all you can see is the blood work. You haven't talked to your doctor on what it actually means for you specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is really, really hard to go through. I never looked at my blood work. I don't think I ever could because of that. I was always too scared. So how did you stop yourself from looking at it? Because you looked at it for a while and at one point you just stopped, or you didn't just stop, but it must have been a transition.
I think going back to what I said earlier about kind of learning triggers with anxiety, is that's a trigger I never had to worry about before. I was never having to get blood work done all the time, but through having an illness, I've realized, okay, going to new doctors and getting blood work done is one of my anxiety triggers. And so I know myself, and I know that if I look at my blood work, I'm going to ruin a perfectly good day, because I'm going to see all these results that I wasn't expecting and start worrying about it and Googling things and trying to figure out what's wrong. So I think just through this, like learning what my new anxiety triggers are has been helpful. So I like know now if I'm going to a new doctor, they might say this and you might get upset and you're just going to deal with it. Or I know when I get blood work, okay, you're going to get anxious if you look at it. So just try not to, because I've just been so much happier when you're not constantly like, because I know myself and I know once I see blood work, I'm going to be upset. And if I don't look at it, then I'm just not upset. So I think just recognizing like what your new anxiety triggers are has been really helpful for me.
That's good. So how did you learn your new anxiety triggers? Because like obviously before you got diagnosed or before you started feeling any symptoms, you had completely different ones, which you obviously may still have, but or probably do, right?
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah. So then when you got the illness, you got a bunch of new ones after working so hard to get through your other ones from before it. So what was that like, or how did it feel to get all these new ones and recognize them and things like that?
Yeah, it was definitely really scary at first. I think just like with having the doctor thing, like I was never expecting a doctor to say, oh, you're so young to be dealing with all this. Like that's my trigger every single time. But I think it only just comes with experience. Like you're not going to get an illness and realize, oh, I know I'm going to be upset going to a new doctor. And I know that blood work is going to trigger me. It just comes through experience, and you're going to probably have to feel some of those lows. But over time, you learn what makes you upset or what is harder for you to deal with the illness. Like now when I at the beginning, I'd wake up and my neck would be sore and I'd be freaking out all day. But now I'm just more used to that because I've like learned that about myself. But I still know that dealing with the doctors and the blood work is still hard for me. So I just try to avoid it until it's necessary.
Yeah, I agree with that. I try to avoid it too. I know it's really hard for a lot of people to avoid it. But like you said, I think experience is really, really important to get through that too, because with experience, you learn more, you realize it becomes normal for you and things like that. Mm-hmm. So with that, the anxiety, how long did it take you? Not how long. Forgot my question. I'll have Matt cut this.
I know there's a couple parts I'm like, Matt, please cut this.
Had the question in my head and then it totally left me, which you know what, let's talk about brain fog. So we're coming back now. So did you experience like really bad, or do you experience really bad brain fog, and does that make things really hard?
Yeah, I do occasionally. That's, I think the scariest thing for me was just not being able to kind of like remember things. I feel like I should be able to recall and remember. And that could also just be a side effect of having really bad anxiety about the situation, because everyone has different symptoms. And so I'm always just like, oh, I could be having a hard time recalling something because I'm just anxious about my health, because I know that can affect it too. Because I've struggled a lot with kind of like disassociation with having an illness, which is just scary and not feeling like you're real at times. I think it's just your body's way of kind of like escaping from your reality for a bit. Because I being in pain and tired all the time isn't fun for anyone. So that's been one of the scary things I've just like dealt with not really knowing what's going on sometimes. But yeah, I think just like finding ways to relieve my anxiety, like going outside and like reading and grounding myself has been helpful to get back to that.
I wanted to go on that too, the dissociation and any derealization, depersonalization, all of that. I think a lot of people end up developing that if they don't already have it when they get sick, or if they got sick young, it develops with them as they get older, as they get sick. So what was probably the hardest part of that for you with the disassociation? Because it is scary. It's like really, really weird.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no idea what's going on, but you do at the same time. It's like a weird
thing.
Like
you're just going through the motions and you're like, what did I just do all day? Yeah, I think it's just scary, like not knowing when I'm going to snap out of it, kind of, because I always know like it goes away at some point. And also just driving can be scary. Doing anything can be scary. But I think something that's just really, really helped me through meeting people that also have illnesses is that like how my body is feeling and who I am aren't like the same thing in a way. Like I know some people that are in wheelchairs and like they like mentally you can, I'm trying to think of how to explain this actually. It's just, I think what's helped me a lot is realizing that like while my body might be fighting against me, like I'm still the same person. And like people who have other illnesses, like they're still who they are, but their body is just not happy with them. And like I think what just makes me feel better is knowing that like I am not this, if this makes sense, like I am not like
no, it makes complete sense. It's like it's exactly what the mind is separate from the body.
Yeah.
Thing is like that whole theory is.
Yeah. But so. I think that's helpful because I'm on an advisory board for people that just have any sort of illness. And there's a couple girls that are in wheelchairs and have other illnesses. And they're like, yeah, like they're still the same person, but just because you have some sort of illness doesn't completely change who you are.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I feel like a lot of people feel like it completely changes who they are, which maybe in some way it does, but I don't think you lose, or I think you do in a way at the same time. It's really weird. It's different for everyone.
Yeah, it's
why it's so hard to explain. It's like some people feel like they completely change. Others kind of grew up with it, like myself. So it's like, it's basically who I am this whole time. Like maybe I got worse mentally as I got older, but I'm still the same person since it's from when I was little. But then others feel like it completely changed who they are and they have no idea who they are anymore. And that's, I think, a really hard thing to go through. So where do you think you fall in that? Because now you realize, like, you're still who you are, separate from what your body may be with the illness. So do you ever think you lost a lot of yourself or gained anything new or things like that?
I mean, like we talked about earlier with the working out kind of thing, that was probably the hardest thing to feel like I lost and being as active as I used to be. But I've realized that through having an illness, it's given me new passions. I've gotten really into cooking and reading and things that I didn't really do before because I was so focused on this one, like being active was my big thing. And so I feel like, honestly, like I feel like getting an illness in a way was kind of like a blessing to me, because beforehand I was super like always scheduled, working out every single day, super type A, always on top of things, and so worried about eating healthy and working out every day and just being like the perfect human in a way. And having an illness made me realize like I'm so out of control of that, and to just kind of slow down and like take each day as it comes. It's like made me live more in the present just based on symptoms, and like you could have one great day and one bad day and you just don't know. And so I think just like it's just taught me to be a lot less in control and just kind of still go with the flow. And I don't know how I would have gained that insight if I hadn't been diagnosed with something or hadn't had to go through this, because I was just I had hardly anything ever bad ever happened to me. Everything was just like perfect. And then this happened and I was like, wait, this is different. But yeah, I just don't know how else I would have gained this like sort of insight and knowledge about life and control and just taking things go with the flow unless I had had this happen just based off of who I was before.
And I think a lot of people feel that way too. Because like you said, a lot of people were super in control of their lives and didn't realize that life can change the next day. I mean, you see quotes on Instagram everywhere where they're like, tomorrow might change your life in some either good or bad way. So I think a lot of people that get sick or start going through that journey, it like makes them realize my life can change at any moment. Like it's not going to be the way it is right now forever. But you gain a lot of good things, like you said. And I think that's important to remember for mental health too, is like to remember the good things you have gained from it, like friends with you, cooking, different passions, like anything. Because it's so easy to also focus on how bad it can make you feel with forgetting everything you did gain that was good that came from that. Like if you didn't get sick, you wouldn't have your cooking account. You probably we wouldn't have met
I wouldn't know you. Yeah.
We would have no idea who each person is. We wouldn't have met the people on Zoom. We wouldn't have met anyone. So I think it's almost like a good thing in a way, but it's also really hard to see that on some days. Sometimes even if you don't believe it, you can just say it to yourself and it's like, this illness brought me this community, all these people, these passions, everything with it, which I think is important to remember. But again, it's hard to, because it's hard to remember anything good when you just feel awful every day.
Yeah, and like there definitely are days when I wake up and I can be more positive than others, but like some days when you're just waking up feeling horrible, saying, oh, I have my food Instagram and I've met so many great people and this, like, that doesn't change how I'm feeling that day. Like, it's a little good reminder, but at the same time, I'm like, you know what, I just don't have a good, I'm not feeling good today. Like, you can say as many positive, like, affirmations to yourself and, like, try to feel better, but it's also okay to just let yourself have I'm gonna lay in bed and not do anything, because this does suck. Like, even though I've, like, been able to learn these great things from having this, like, it doesn't change the situation still sucks for anyone. Like, anyone going through it, and, like, I'm so, like, I love positivity, but at the same time, it's so okay to, like, have a bad day. It's so okay to, like, acknowledge I'm feeling really bad today and not do much. And because it is hard too, because a lot of people will say, oh, if you get up and go for a walk, you'll feel a lot better. And like, yeah, you might, but also it's okay to let yourself still kind of like recognize that you're having a bad day, and it's okay, because it's a bad situation to be in for anyone.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, because obviously positivity is important, whatever, but most days you're not going to feel positive at all. I mean, who would? Feel sick all the time. No one's gonna be positive. If someone has the flu for a week, they're in like the worst mood of their life. So when it is your whole life, it's like, why should you have to feel good all the time or be positive all the time? It's pretty much impossible. And I think more people need to see that as well, just because, like we said earlier, Instagram shows a lot of good sides, and it's like, but that's not the reality of any of these. The reality is, like, it sucks. Some people will be severely depressed, whether it's clinical or not, if it's just coinciding with the illness. Some people will have like severe anxiety, they can't control it, like we said earlier. Some people have derealization, depersonalization, they have no idea where they are, have no idea what they're doing. It's almost like they're watching a movie. And I think those lows are like super important to talk about, just because everyone feels it. And I feel like not enough people realize that almost everyone with an illness goes through all those stages of mental health too. And I think it's really hard to get out of. No, it's okay. You can go. I was just saying that. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, like, you reminded me, going back to like, I think it's so important to tell your friends or your family when you are having a harder day, because like, I know for me, and I'm sure a lot of people, when you wake up having a flare up or feeling worse than others, my mood is going to be affected. And I never want people in my life to think that I'm mad at them for something that they didn't do, or that they did something to make me mad. And so I think it's just important to like, because sometimes when we're not talking about telling everyone every day that I feel bad, they can sometimes forget that you're dealing with something. And so I think it's just important to communicate with the people around you, like, hey, I'm having a flare up, like, you didn't do anything, I'm just having a bad day. Like, or if you need a break or need to go home and sit down, like, just be honest about, you didn't do anything, like, I just really need to take a nap right now. That's like been really helpful with me in like my friendships, like going back to how just like you don't want to mention that every single day you're not feeling the best, but because when you are having your good days, like you're going to be in a better mood, but having your bad days, like I definitely am in a bit of a worse mood.
I think that's really important too, because I definitely have in the past projected onto people just because I was having a really bad physical day. So I'd be angry, I'd be irritable, like I'd snap at people for no reason. And I think that just kind of comes with it. And I think telling those people when you're not going to be in a good mood is a really good idea, just because like it's better than them not knowing and thinking you're mad at them or thinking you're being rude for no reason or thinking they did something wrong or anything like that at all. So how long do you think it took you to realize that and start making them aware or realizing that you'd be in a worse mood on those days around those people? Because I know that takes some realization.
Yeah, I don't think it took too long, just because when this all started, I was telling everyone. I was like, have you had joint pain before? Like randomly, have you randomly had your neck hurting? I was super open about it from the beginning. I'm just an open person in general. And so I can be more difficult for other people, I think. But for me, it was just, I try to be like self-aware. Like I know what a lot of my triggers are. And so I know if I have a doctor's appointment and I come home crying and I snap at my parents, I'm like, it wasn't you. I had a bad doctor's appointment. And I think just like, I've just been always pretty decent about doing that, just because I don't like people thinking that I'm like mad at them for things that they didn't do or whatnot.
Yeah, I think that's important. Did you ever feel like people that you did tell didn't understand, even though you were making them aware at all? Or did they all pretty much understand?
I feel like it was easier for some people than others, because I do have a friend who she has psoriatic arthritis. So she has dealt with joint pain before. And some of my friends have had tendonitis, but other ones have never had any sort of health issue ever. So it's hard for them to understand. I'm thankful to have friends who are really supportive and they really like want me to get help, and they are really happy when I do something good happen and whatnot. But it definitely was easier for those who've been through something similar to understand. Because it's hard to explain to someone, yeah, my whole body is hurting and like I'm miserable because I can't get out of my body and like escape what's going on. But yeah, definitely easier for some people than others to understand.
Well, that's really good that you had people that are super supportive too, because that's really hard to find. And I'm really happy to hear when people do, because I have a lot of good friends too who have been like pretty awesome. And of course you lose like a some on the way, but I have some really good friends. It sounds like you do too, obviously. And I just hope that other people do. But I know that some people don't, which makes me really sad, because people should try to understand.
Join Abby's support group.
Right? That's what we talk about on there. Same thing. But yeah, I think that's really important. I was going to ask you what you feel like on like your lowest days, or what, not even that, but what the hardest part was for you mentally going through this, which we kind of touched on earlier, being out of control, but like some of maybe the worst stages you've been through with that, or anything like that that you're comfortable with talking about, of course. Yeah. Just because I know a lot of people get really, really, really bad days too. So
I think like mentally was just so hard at the beginning, especially like what I talked about earlier, is realizing that like my mind and like my body are two separate things. And at the beginning, I especially was like, okay, I'm gonna get up and go to the gym today. Like I'm gonna do this, and realizing that my body wasn't there. It was just so frustrating more than anything to still be in this mindset of wanting to do the things I used to do and not being able to. And it was really hard. And I definitely like learned a lot about coping with that through going to therapy. A lot of people, some people like therapy and some people don't, but it was really helpful for me to talk to my therapist about that, because she was able to give me alternatives to still have like to get my days better. I guess I don't know how to say that.
Yeah, but that makes sense. I like that where you're still in the mindset of before you got sick, and but you can't, because your body can't do what your mind is trained to do almost, or conditioned to do in a way. So do you know like maybe how long that transition took, or what like therapy helped you with it, and anything about that?
I think probably maybe like a year or so into getting symptoms when I realized like, okay, this is probably going to be a bit more of a long-term thing. Because at first, when I started having pain and all this stuff, I had no idea what was going on. I was like, okay, maybe I injured myself working out because I did that. And maybe I did this. And then when I started to realize like, okay, I don't think this is just an injury, I was able to kind of mindset change and be like, I need to start kind of like changing my hobbies maybe, and start doing things that I can do. and not just put too much pressure on myself to be back to who I was. Like, you can't expect yourself to get back in the gym and work out harder than you used to when you haven't been able to for a year because you've been in pain. And I think just kind of like realizing it and coming to terms with like, okay, my life is going to be a little bit different now and not exactly what I want, but I'm still going to do what I can to make myself happy and like as healthy as I can be. But yeah, I think just realizing this is kind of something you just gonna have to deal with for a while, probably.
Yeah. And that's a hard thing to realize. I think it takes a lot of bad days to get there. I don't know if it did for you.
Yeah,
maybe.
a lot of bad days.
Yeah. So it takes a lot of bad days to get there. So on those bad days, of course, only if you're comfortable talking about it, almost like, what did they look like? Like, what were they like? What did you feel? Things like that. So I know a lot of people, including myself, just have so many bad days where you're super low and it's just an experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, especially, my biggest symptom is just I have a lot of pain, joint pain, like my muscle pain in my neck, shoulders, hips, knees. So on those days where I'd wake up, I just want to lay in bed the whole day, not do anything, didn't want to run errands or really do anything. And I think one of my lower points, I had my parents come get me from school an hour and a half away, probably at 10 o'clock at night, because I was in so much pain and so scared, couldn't sleep. And so they came and got me and brought me home. Just because it was a horrible night. I was like, I think a lot of people with illnesses have thought like I don't even know if I was gonna say.
No, I know what you're going with.
I know, just like I can't do this anymore. Like that kind of feeling. I've had a lot of like, I cannot do this anymore days. Like, this is horrible. I cannot do this anymore. I've definitely had more positive days now than when this first started, but it's just frustrating at the beginning to have, and even just still now, there's still some frustrating, I can't do this anymore days, but that's what it's just so important to find positives in your situation to help you in those I can't do this anymore days. Like, I can do this now. I have a community of friends who I can reach out to. I have people that benefit from like me talking to them. And even just, I think anyone going through something, you can help anyone else going through it too, just by knowing one other person that's going through something similar to you. It's just like, it's so nice to know the people that are going through something too.
Yeah. And I think those days that like, almost like a freak out, almost like, I don't want to do this, I can't do this, like this is too much for me to handle, or just days like that, I think are super important to talk about, because a lot of people deal with them. A lot of people get that low to the point where they're like, I don't want to exist, I don't want to live with this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. Like, they even like, there's easier way outs. That's what happens. And I think that's, well, I wouldn't say, I mean, it is easier way out. I wouldn't say obviously it's not the right way. You should not choose that as an option, obviously. But I know a lot of people go through those days, which makes it really, really, really hard. And I think it's a really important topic to shed light on, just because of how many people that there are that feel like that. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to talk about. For a lot of people, it is really, really hard to talk about. But I think that's probably one of the most important topics to touch on, is that, because I think there's not enough people that realize that so many people feel the same way. So I've had people message me like, oh my God, I thought I was crazy for feeling like this. I thought I was crazy for wanting to take what feels like the easier way out. And just situations like that is insane. And it's scary for a lot of people. So whatever you want to say on that, you can maybe right now, just because I think it's important. It's like an experience. It's part of the whole thing, only if you're comfortable, obviously. But
yeah, because like I not really anymore, but I used to have a lot of those days at the beginning when I was just really, really frustrated with having to figure out who like I was as a person again. And I think just for me, like what's made it a lot mentally better is thinking of all of those things I've learned from this, and like realizing that everybody's going to have some sort of challenge they have in life. I haven't struggled with many hard things before, and if this is the one really, really hard thing I have to deal with that puts me to that breaking point, then I think I'll be able to deal with anything, honestly. Like at this point, I think nothing, knock on wood, nothing would be able to like break me the way that this has, because I felt more mentally low, more alone, more miserable with my life the past few years because of this than I had any years before. And I just don't think it would be able to get worse than that, but I can see it coming up from like being able to finally realize what I've learned from this and like how I can benefit, and just like the life lessons I've learned from having something have kept me going and kept me out of that I can't do this anymore thing. Because like it does, with experience and time, it does get better in a way. There still are really awful. I just think the beginning for me at least was the worst, with not having any sort of idea what was going to happen to me. But yeah, I definitely get out of those I can't do this anymore days by just thinking of how much I will be able to do now because I have still like stuck around and been able to get through this.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of people feel that way too, is that they've kind of learned that they can't control it either. And that everything they've gained, I think a lot of people try to remind themselves of on those days, just because that's all you can really do. Like, those days are really hard to get out of, and a lot of people experience it more than others, some a few times, some get worse with medication. Like, there's so many factors, and it affects everyone so differently. But I know a lot of people probably will relate to what you just said too, because it's not an easy topic to talk about or even go through, obviously, but it's definitely one that I think a lot of people go through, or that at least I've talked to, I think. So
Yeah,
I think it's a really important one to talk about. But
I think just like realizing all the things that I haven't had to deal with in life that I know other people have, like I've been so blessed with so many things, and like I think just reminding myself that if this is the one thing that's going to teach me things and make me a better person and who I should be, then like, so be it. Because there are so many things I didn't have to deal with growing up that plenty of other people have had to.
Yeah, I think that's a really important lesson.
That helped like put my situation in perspective, like going back to like going to the hospital before, being able to just see that, or put my situation in perspective was just really helpful too.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. It might be a perfect way for us to end, honestly. I think it's been probably about an hour.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. Recording doesn't say, but I think that was like a really good conversation too, and one that I think a lot of people will be able to relate to. So thank you. And if there's anything else you want to say, maybe not.
Oh, I just
hope you think we're good.
I think I think we'll be good. Thank you for having me, Abby. I hope that a lot of people can relate and hopefully maybe benefit from stuff. And I know both of our DMs are always open if anybody ever needs to talk to anyone or someone to relate to. And it does get better.
Yeah, that's really important to remember. Our DMs are open and that it does get better.
Life will go on. Be strong.
Yeah, definitely.